I think we as a collective need to start studying the phenomenon of male artists using extreme scenes of violence and torture, not only towards minorities, but more specifically towards women, as a way to express their own feelings of extreme isolation and depression. Because what does a scene where a woman gets brutally raped and killed has anything to do with your feelings of isolation? Let's find out. Welcome back, my gorgeous viewers and readers. I hope your weekend was filled with warm reads under the rain and 15 steps skincare routines. Today, I want to talk about a topic that I have been thinking about for the past week as I started reading A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. And the question that has been popping into my mind has been, why do male artists express their own social isolation via using violence towards minorities, but more specifically towards women? Because this is not an isolated example, right? Last year I read American Psycho, and we also have the perfect example of how male artists use violence as a way to express isolation. And we also see many examples in pop culture. So let's start. Just as a quick summary for those who haven't read the book, A Clockwork Orange is about Alex, who is a 15-year-old who loves to do as much chaos as possible. We're talking about thefts, robberies, any sort of violence towards anyone and everyone, and sexual abuse, rape, whatever. And after a robbery gone wrong, he is convicted to 14 years in prison. And after 2-3 years of his sentence, he actually opts for a treatment where he is Pavloved into hating all this sort of antisocial behavior. And then after this treatment, and after proving that he dislikes and has a physical reaction towards these kind of behaviors, he is released from prison. I have to be completely honest with you guys, and whilst I was reading A Clockwork Orange, Alex genuinely reminded me of Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, and other characters like Hannibal, for example. And these kind of characters, like, I think I put them all together into the same box and the same category, which is men who are extremely isolated from their communities because of their high psychopathy, right? All these characters that I am mentioning or that I put over here, I see them as characters who don't view people as actual individuals, but they see them as NPCs from their own life, right? They are either disgusted by these characters, or like by these NPCs, right? These individuals, and they think these individuals are there to be abused by them, right? Or to use for these violent fantasies. Or they have other characters that are also NPCs, but they don't abuse them because they think they can control them for their own benefit, right? We see this with Patrick Bateman. I see this with Alex, because even though Alex has friends, technically, right, he doesn't have any sort of attachment towards his friends or towards his family and parents, for example. He just doesn't care. Same as Patrick Bateman, right? He doesn't really have any sort of friends, or he doesn't have anyone that he actually really cares about. They just care about themselves because of their high psychopathy and lack of empathy. But more specifically, one thing that I see in all these characters is that they have this sort of like narcissism. Apart from being psychopaths, they also have this narcissism and this delirium of grandeur, right? Like, for example, Patrick Bateman, he thinks that he's the shit, right? But actually, he's just someone like meet along the ladder, right? Or for example, Alex thinks that he's like this like gang leader, but actually he's just a child. He's just 15 years old, right? And I like, when I look into why the writers are actually writing this book, or what was the reason why they did so, I just find it strangely weird. Like, why do you create these characters as a way to discuss your own isolation, right? Do you feel like you're isolated, or your social isolation implies that you are a psychopath, or that you are experiencing psychopathic behavior because you are isolated, right? Like, why do you as a writer find comfort in creating fantasies of murder, rape, and abuse. Like, I just don't understand it. As a clinical psychologist, I find very concerning the amount of examples that I saw from this trope, right? Or this category more specifically. Not only we have characters like Patrick Bateman or Alex from A Clockwork Orange, but we also have characters like the Boltons in Game of Thrones or American Horror Story, Hannibal, and we have like in many series in pop culture, we usually see this kind of character, right? The most represented example is the Joker. Like, I would say he is the prime example of a man who is extremely isolated and then just falls into violence, right? But usually the violence is not against the ones that abuse the character, right? It's always against the oppressed. It's never against the oppressors, it's always against the oppressed. And one of the things that I was thinking first, like that I started ruminating about it, was where does the psychopathy come from, right? Is it nature or is it nurture? Does it come from genetics? Does it come from the environment? What is going on there? When we look into nature, when it comes to psychology of personality, we see not only that there are certain traits that are passed down from parents to children, but also we see sexual dimorphism between men and women in personality, right? So there are certain studies, also, by the way, I have my notes here, so I'm sorry if I don't look at you guys, but yeah, there are certain studies here that show a sexual dimorphism of personality across cultures, right? So this is not something that we only see in one culture and then there are differences in other cultures, but it's something that happens across the world, right? So we see that characters or that personality traits like aggressiveness, openness to experiences, and then personality traits like the dark triads, which are narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. We see that these 5 traits tend to be scored higher by men, in the meaning of men tend to score higher in these traits, right? So obviously men tend to be more aggressive, they tend to be more open to experiences, but also they tend to be more psychopathic, Machiavellic, and psychopathic, which many people explain these traits or these high scores by hormones, right? They say there are a lot of studies that mention that testosterone actually affects how much aggression you could have, or like how aggressive you will be, not only personality wise, but also in showing your aggressive behavior, right? So one of the explanations is because of testosterone, but then we also have the other side, which is the nurture environmental side. On the other side, when we talk about nurture, about the environment, there are a lot of factors that imply or that affect psychology and traits in general. So, for example, one of the things is definitely culture, religion, or parental style, for example, or any sort of trauma that you have experienced, right? So, obviously, when we look across cultures, there is, even though there are a lot of differences across cultures, obviously, that's why there are multiple cultures and there are infinite cultures. One thing that stays stagnant is patriarchy, right? We see in the vast majority of cultures, there is a sort of natural effect, which is patriarchy. And we live, as women, we experience misogyny. So I would say that the main factor that we see when it comes to expression of personality traits is how misogynistic or how patriarchal your culture is. So, for example, when we look into women's scores, right, for personality traits, we see that across the globe, women tend to score similar traits or similar scores, but the expression of these traits are different, right? So if we look into openness to experience, we see that women in Western societies or in societies that are less misogynistic, they tend to be more open to experience. So, for example, going clubbing or having multiple sexual partners, drinking alcohol, solo traveling. Whereas in cultures where patriarchy is more stagnant and there are more there are stronger rules against openness to experience for women. Women tend to be less open to experience. They tend to express less openness to experience, but they still have these similar scores to the personality trait than women in the West or women in other cultures. So, what does this actually mean? When we look into the specific personality traits that are that have sexual dimorphism in it, so in them. So, for example, aggressiveness, we see that depending on your individual score. So, if you score really high in aggressiveness, for example, and depending on your other scores in the other personality traits, so for example, neuroticism or openness to openness to experience or cordiality, for example, depending on the combination on these scores, you could be more prone to do these certain behaviors, right? So, for example, if you are very neurotic, but you're very cordial, you tend to experience more major depressive episodes. But if you're very aggressive and you are not neurotic at all, meaning that you're not that empathetic, then you tend to, or you are more prone to experience antisocial behaviors or to do antisocial behaviors. And that is something that we see in men, right? So the fact that they tend to score higher in aggressiveness, and depending on the combination on the other traits and also the dark triad, then we see a higher chance of creating this antisocial behavior or being involved in antisocial behavior. Now, after having all the theory about psychology, personality traits, whatever, I had 3 questions that I needed the answer for, right? So the first question is about why do these characters do these things, in the sense of why does the character specifically does all this antisocial behavior? What is the reason behind it, right? What comes into the psyche of the character for him to do these things? The second question is related to the writer themselves, right? Like, why are you fantasizing about torture, violence, and sexual assault? And why are you making your character do that? And then use isolation as a way to, like, why are you using violence as a way to excuse your isolation or as a way to cope with your isolation? And then the third question is this, like, is this just something that happens within the general masses or the general male spectrum? Or is this something that is just isolated in art or isolated within these specific writers? And as always, with psychology, it is never black or white. It's always gray and it's always hard to explain. But I personally think that these 3 questions are interconnected. So let me kick and let me just explain my theory behind this behavior or behind all these male writers writing about sexual violence or violence in general. And I would say starting with the first question, right? So why do these characters do these things, right? So I would say it is as a way to express, like, the writer's beliefs of society, right? Or what happens within society. Because when I look into extreme isolation or cases of men that are very isolated, like for example, incels, I see that they have very similar psyche or very similar ways of processing information, more specifically very psychopathic and very little empathy, right? So I look into incels or into classical characters that have this sort of incel-like mentality, like for example the Joker, right? And I see characters that have been heavily abused in the past or that have experienced very heavy trauma, right? So if I look into the Joker, for example, we see how he is a male loser. He's just the kind of person that everyone steps on, that no one really cares about, and that he is extremely lonely. Like that's the main point, right? That the characters are very lonely. And I believe this is fully rooted into patriarchy, right? Because when I look into patriarchy, right, I see the way patriarchy shapes both men and young men and boys, right? They are taught from a young age that in order for them to be accomplished, they have to be successful, right? Not only monetarily and career wise, but if they do these things, they will get ultimately what they want, right? Which is women. They want that, like, the ultimate goal for men, or for men, is or should be women, access to women. That's what gives you the ultimate status, right? And you can only access to women, according to patriarchy, obviously, if you are monetarily successful, career wise successful, and then if you are someone that can give out, right? Like someone who can provide, because that's what patriarchy shows them, right? And that's something that we saw until like the late 20th century. Like if you look into, what's the name? If you look into the traditional nuclear family of the 1940s and 1950s, we see that the man is the sole provider, right? Whereas the woman and the children, or like whatever they decide to have, they are solely dependent on the father, on the male figure, right? And that is what these young men are taught, right? Like if you provide, if you do all these things, if you slave yourself away for work, you will get the wife, you will get the children, and you will get the house, right? You will get this dream, this American dream that everyone is expecting. Men are taught from a very young age that they are naturally born leaders, that they have to be strong, they have to be reliable, they have to be dependent. They are the ones that guide people through, right? Like that's what they are taught. And like society expects them to be an alpha, or to become an alpha like person, right? They learn from a young age that they have to be successful, because that's the only thing that they can bring, right? They don't bring emotional maturity, they don't bring like emotional safety, but they bring, like, they only physically provide, right? If they provide money, they can provide a house for a wife, and then she is the one that can do the other side of the coin, right? Or the other side of patriarchy, which is bringing the emotions. That's why there are so many men within the boomer Gen X generation that are literally absent fathers, or like emotionally absent fathers, because their only role is to provide, right? And I think this is taught as this is your duty as a man, right? You shouldn't be bringing emotions. You shouldn't be bringing emotional safety. You should only provide. You are here in this world to be like career-wise successful, so you can provide, or you can have a future with women, which is the ultimate goal. And this system actually worked for centuries and millennia, right? We see it in ancient paintings, and we see it in medieval histories, like in medieval stories, and even until like 1950s, 1960s, that even nowadays, there are many communities that still have this idea of man has to be the provider, right? But now, many other men, especially in the Western societies or Western cultures, they find themselves that actually being a provider or being successful monetarily is not enough, because for the past 60 to 70 years, women have actually fought for their rights, right? They have actually fought for their financial liberation. They have also fought for their ability to vote, and also bodily autonomy, right? With abortion, for example, or medical laws. And now women are as free as they have ever been, right? So now women are their own providers. They don't rely and they don't depend on someone that will pay the bills for them and that will ensure their monetary or like their financial stability and safety. So now all these men that are literally like bare minimum, that they have just like their career, or even not only their career, they just have some money. Now they find themselves alone because no one actually wants them. They have to like women have raised the bar, and now we don't depend on anyone. So therefore, all these men that would otherwise be married or would otherwise be with someone, now they find themselves alone. And all these men find, like, they feel lied to, and they feel frustrated and angered and furious with society because, first of all, they have been lied to, right? Which is true, they have been lied to, but also because they don't know how to raise the bar, right? Because according to them, they have everything they need, or everything it is expected from them, which is career success, right? So why they don't understand, or they can't conceive why they are not being picked over other men, or they are not picked just at all because they have what they like, what was asked from them. But what's even worse is that not only they find themselves without a partner or without women, which is the ultimate success or the ultimate status signal, but also they find themselves in very shallow relationships with friends, right? Patriarchy not only shows them that they have to be successful, they have to be providers, but also they are shown that they can't show emotions, or that the only emotion that they can show is anger, right? Or happiness, either happiness or anger. So it comes to a time, or like it comes to for men, it comes to a realization that all the friendships that they have, or the vast majority of them, are very shallow. They are like, they are only the voice, or like people like these. There are a lot of men then, and this is something crazy, right? There are a lot of men out there that have known their friends for like 10, 15 plus years, and they don't know their birthday, they don't know like if they have siblings or not, they don't know where they were from, where they were born, and they just have no idea, right? And they don't really care. And for example, I have a lot of friends that tell me, oh yeah, like this person that we know or that we have in common, that we know, or both of us, oh, this person has broken up with their girlfriend. And when I ask questions, or like, oh, what happened, or anything, when I try to find more information, they don't really know because they haven't asked, right? Like they just get the basic information and then they just like do their own things, because a lot of men don't have like strong relationships or strong friendships. They just have surface level, happy level type of friendships. They don't actually go deeper. There are men that do, don't get me wrong, but yeah, there are a lot of men that have just very surface level relationships. And also when it comes to a certain age, let's say like around 30, or around when you start having kids and getting married, there are a lot of men that rely on their wives or their spouses for community, right? Because a lot of women are the ones, like, there are a lot of examples where women are at the center of their communities, right? They have friendships, they have very strong bonds, but more specifically, they are the ones that maintain the relationships with the parents, not only the parents of the wife, but also the parents of the husband, right? They are the ones that remember the birthdays. They are the ones that organize the parties and invite everyone over, like barbecues, for example, or Christmases or Thanksgiving if you're American. But also they are the ones that organize like all the social events with the kids, right? So for example, parents in kindergarten or the friends of the children, and they just create this community all together. So the wives are actually the ones that make the men socialize in many cases. So now imagine you are a guy, right, that you have worked your ass off for like multiple years trying to build a career for yourself, trying to be a provider, many times not being successful because the work environment out there is crazy, right? Like you cannot get a job for shit. Like even women cannot get a job either, right? So imagine you find yourself that everything that was promised to you, that like the wife, the happily ever after life, is what that was promised to you. That's something that you cannot get, right? Because not only you are not successful, but also now you have to put effort into making yourself good, or like making yourself have the bare minimum, right? And not only that, like not only you cannot get a partner, or you cannot get women, but also you find yourself completely isolated with society because of patriarchy, right? And this is the thing like that actually make my brain switch, and it's the fact that once they find themselves extremely isolated, instead of actually changing themselves, or actually finding like all these fury and all this frustration and rage, and just go for for patriarchy, which at the end of the day is actually the one that is maintaining them in this position and making them suffer. They go to they go towards the oppressed, right? They never try to fight the oppressor. They always go to the oppressed. And I think it's because they realize that all these men realize that if they go for the oppressor, they actually will lose the benefits from patriarchy, right? Because even though they are oppressed, because at the end of the day they are losers, right? And they are men that at the bottom of the barrel, no one really likes them or no one really wants them, but they don't go for the oppressor. They don't go for all these high status or high class men that are hovering all these roles or that are hovering all these positions of power. They go for the oppressed because they are the ones that they can actually take, right? Because they cannot take these ones. They can only take the oppressed. So they go, they create all these, they use all this violence and all this frustration, and they make the oppressed pay. And this is exactly why I think there are so many examples in media or in pop culture of this trope of the antisocial psychopath or the abused by society psychopathy trope, right? Because I see all these men that find themselves isolated, more specifically male artists, because we all know that artists are not getting paid fairly in this society. And also there are a lot of male artists that are genuinely insufferable, right? So they find themselves at the bottom of the barrel, as we said before, and patriarchy has taught them that they can't show emotions, and the only emotions that they can show is anger. So then, with their own internalized misogyny and their own frustration, they create these fantasies of hurting people, right? Because at the end of the day, all these fantasies, they don't only come from all this frustration, but it also comes from a sense of power, from a sense of control, right? Because what they miss, or the thing that they don't have when they are at the bottom of the barrel, is control and is power. That's why they are creating all these fantasies of violence, all these fantasies of sexual abuse, of rape, of just killing people and just torturing them, because the main point of these fantasies is the control. It's the fact that they have the ultimate power to do whatever they want with these minorities, with these women. And the best two examples of these are Patrick Bateman from American Psycho and also Alex, right? We see from the get-go that they don't have any sort of empathy. They do not care about how all this torture and all this violence makes people feel. They only care about the benefits that they are receiving, right? Which is, at the end, they are getting some sort of satisfaction from these from these fantasies, because they are in control, right? And then, as far as you go into the big and then you finish them both, you realize that they have no sort of remorse. They don't feel remorseful about doing all these things or torturing people. They only stop doing it because they realize that they will get caught, or they realize that that's not something that gives them pleasure anymore. They don't feel empathy. They don't feel bad for all the things they did. It's just they realize, actually, this is not something that makes me happy anymore. So they either stop, or they just go into even more violence, and then eventually get caught. As a quick conclusion, I would say that all these male artists that are using any sort of extreme violence or abuse towards minorities and women, even though in the vast majority of cases, or I would say all cases, are trying to explain some sort of internal battle or internal turmoil between amongst men, at the end of the day, what it shows is their own fantasy of power, right? Or their own fantasy of wanting control and having the ultimate power of decision amongst between minorities, or between someone that doesn't really have as much power as you. So at the end of the day, I would say that all these fantasies are rooted into some sort of desire for power, into some sort of desire of becoming the oppressor rather than keep being the oppressed. That's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching and thank you for staying until the end. And if you have read A Clockwork Orange or you have seen the film, or if you have any idea about American Psycho or any other examples, please make sure that you put them in the comments and just tell me, why do you think these characters have this sort of antisocial behavior? I would love to hear some more examples about this specific case. Or if you have any writers that also have written about this sort of like category that we've talked about, I would love to know. So I would love to know them. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and also don't forget to like and subscribe the video, and just follow me on social media if you want. I also have Substack. And yeah, thank you again, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Bye, guys.